That day, the whole world watched the stormtroopers of violent white supremacy act as the vanguard of a massive violent political insurrection against the government of the United States that smashed our windows, invaded our Capitol, wounded and injured more than 140 Capitol police officers and Metropolitan Police Department officers, and left several people dead. Let's be clear that the most dangerous domestic terror threat facing America today comes from the forces that attacked our government on January 6th.
That was Democratic Congressman Jamie Raskin pointing out the government's failure in handling what is now the biggest national security threat facing our country today. Domestic extremism fueled by disinformation and the disgraced ex-president's lies about the election. Tackling that threat is now a top priority for the Biden administration after federal agencies under Donald Trump reportedly downplayed right-wing extremism in order to avoid embarrassing Donald Trump. And as we reported earlier this week, a career public servant and whistleblower is now able to speak out about the pressure he faced inside Donald Trump's DHS from his political appointees to bend the truth, hide the truth, suppress the truth. Brian Murphy filed a whistleblower complaint last September, alleging that he was punished for refusing to manipulate intelligence on 3 politically sensitive issues. They are white nationalism, election interference by Russia, and the situation on the southern border. A spokesperson for the Department of Homeland Security denied the allegations when the complaint was first revealed. Joining us now is Department of Homeland Security whistleblower, the former senior DHS official, Brian Murphy. It is a pleasure to get to talk to you. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Let's take these one at a time. I want to start with Russia. There was a sense after the Mueller investigation ended that Donald Trump conducted himself in a more emboldened manner. But what's amazing about your complaint is that the effort to suppress anything bad about Russia seemed to intensify, and especially as it pertained to the 2020 election. Can you just tell us what that was like and what exactly they didn't want to get out?
So thanks for the question. I think what's important to add is a little context so that the viewers will understand the details and the nuances and the pressure. So, I filed my first whistleblower complaint in 2018, about 4 or 5 months after I got to the department. And the second one I filed was in March of 2019. And by the time of September of 2020, I filed my third one, I think the pressure hit a tipping point. So the question you're asking is really important, but it's got to be put in the context where there was pressure on a number of fronts to suppress intelligence. Russia was probably the biggest of them as we got closer to the election, but it wasn't just Russian disinformation. It was all of those threats that you talked about happening at the same time.
So what happened to the information that you had? Did it make its way to local law enforcement? Did it die inside the intelligence community? Did it seep around Donald Trump? What happened to it? Did we sit on it?
Some of it we were able to get out, and a lot of it we weren't. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Part of it, I think your last guest were talking about, was the structure. And the second part of it, meaning the intelligence community structure, they just didn't build on those parts of the intelligence community that could have done a more effective job and should have been resourced better to combat these threats. So Russian disinformation, for example, we had virtually no technology to capture what the Russians were doing and report on it at scale. That's one of the reasons why when I retired from DHS, I'm now fortunate to work for a company called 𝘿𝙃𝙎 that can do this at scale, that works on disinformation, because it's just not about Russia. These other threats are tied to that as well. But I think back to your question, we just didn't have the resources. They were denied. What's not in my whistleblower complaint, but was a part of the background, was the denial by those officials to resource these programs.
Can you just tell me what a day of the suppressing of the intel looked like? You had data you collected. It came from, I imagine, a variety of sources. You went to put it in an assessment, and you gave it to who, and what happened next?
So there was literally nobody collecting, for example, on Russian disinformation, except for a very, a team that I ran within the department. That there was tremendous headwinds to get anything out. Every obstacle you can think of was put in the way. so as we found it, we were able to put things out, but initially, because the sensitivities around the classification level, we could only put it out so far, right, to those that had the access to get it. And, to kind of move forward in 2020, this is all out in the public now, but at that time, we knew full well that Putin had identified President Trump as someone to support and denigrate the Democratic candidates that were out there. Trying to get that information out across the intelligence community to law enforcement, there were just systematic barriers, and people were intimidated. The intelligence, the professionals were intimidated to do it. They knew that their target was going to be on their back.
So I want to read this from the complaint. In mid-May 2020, Mr. Wolf instructed you to cease providing intelligence assessments on the threat of Russian interference in the United States, and instead to start reporting on interference activities by China and Iran. Mr. Wolf stated that these instructions specifically originated from White House National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien. So we know that a couple days before the election, I think it was the Friday or Saturday before the Tuesday election, Mr. Radcliffe did just that, the head of DNI. What did you do when you were asked to report on election interference activities from China and Iran and to suppress the ones on Russia?
Sure. I mean, they're just not the same. They were not at the same scale back then. Certainly, they present a small threat. But the statement from Chad Wolf, to me, and there were others present at the department that heard the same thing at different times or when we were together. So it's not just me that was hearing this from Chad Wolf, was that we were going to amplify China and Russia and exaggerate the threat that they posed simply because they were more aggressive against Trump in terms of their how they went after him. But there is no comparison, and there was no comparison to the scale of the Russian effort. So when you're referring to what the DNI said at that time, I find that ludicrous, quite frankly. I do not believe that a rational professional would have reached a similar conclusion. That is political manipulation at the highest levels.
Was he lying?
I don't know what's in his head. I can unequivocally tell you that from the information that I saw over 25 plus years of dedicated service, having access to the top tier intelligence this country has, and leading into the elections, unless something came in after I was relieved, there's just no way that stands the test of time. And there's no agency or people that I know about that would agree with that statement. And I know that statement got a lot of internal concerns expressed to it. But, I think I was listening to some of your last viewers, and my good friend Clint Watts and others were talking about it. The intimidation by people that did not have the capacity of the jobs that they were to execute the jobs they had from a political appointee perspective had seeped down pretty far into the ranks of government. So it was at the point where people just couldn't get the truth out because of these acolytes that believed in illiberal politics for the benefits of, a certain person or category or whatever it is of politics versus doing the right things for the right reasons.
I asked Colonel Vindman this question, and I ask you this because I really want to know what people from inside the national security apparatus believe. Because everything you describe is, and you're correct to put them back together. I tried to disaggregate them, but they are this toxic blend of disinformation and the Russian disinformation and the disinformation and the enabling of white supremacy. But it feels like the disinformation side is winning. What do you think?
Absolutely. Disinformation is not a threat that where the adversary, it's intentional. I think this is what people need to understand. This is not misinformation where someone makes a mistake. This is an intentional effort, a lot of times by nation states, but also by people within our own country to shape a narrative to create polarization within our society. So, we talk a lot about polarization within Congress and other areas, and certainly that's true from what I know. But from an intelligence perspective, the threat of disinformation is here to stay, and it is just getting worse. And it affects businesses in ways that I don't think they fully understand yet. I had said on another program, and I'll repeat it here. I encourage the audience to go look at the 2044 threat prediction by the Director of National Intelligence, was put out a couple weeks ago. It talks about the threat of disinformation, and it's getting worse across this globe, and it's going to continue to run in that direction unless we build the resources in place and take the technology that's out there to do something about it.
Can you put that threat in the context of the last threat we sort of faced to the homeland that we really understood, and that was the threat of foreign terrorism? I mean, is disinformation a threat along the same level as that?
I think it's very, the end state will be different. This is a slower moving threat that's hard to realize. Where terrorism, at least from the, let's say, Al-Qaeda or ISIS, there's a clear enemy, even though they're not always easy to find. Domestic terrorism, similar. I mean, people break the law, you can see the violence. What we have with the disinformation threat is a much more subtle threat that is harder for people, I think, to generally initially grasp. But once you kind of understand the threat, the resiliency that we need to build in, there are similar parallels. If you look at the countering violent extremism programs that are out there, there are some similar programs about how you counteract it. Again, I think that technology is there. The innovation is not within government. Government needs to be given the tools and the resources and the money to, quite frankly, invest in the technology that does exist to show what's happening at scale and build resources within our schools and our communities so that people understand to be very careful about what they believe on the internet. And it's easy to say, but when you demonstrate it to them, the light bulb does come on.
A Department of Homeland Security whistleblower is speaking out publicly for the first time. Brian Murphy, the acting undersecretary for intelligence at DHS during the Trump administration, says Trump appointees covered up intelligence about Russian interference and white supremacy because those topics made the then president look bad. The new comments from Murphy are shedding some fresh light now on allegations that he previously made in a whistleblower complaint last year. Murphy, who is a Republican and voted for Trump in 2016, says he faced, quote, intense pressure to take intelligence and fit a political narrative. Murphy's last day at DHS was on Friday, and he is with us now to talk about this. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
You say that you were told to lie about multiple topics. Which topics?
So it was really anything that made the president look bad, but from the moment I arrived there was three main topics that really would draw the ire of the administration. They were anything to do with white supremacy, Russian disinformation, and the southwest border. And
so why? Just simply because it made the president look bad?
That was it, yes. They were topics that the president, I presume, did not want to be addressed and did not want to hear about and didn't want anyone else to hear about.
And did officials confront the fact that just ignoring these things could be problematic?
I think it was more than just ignoring them. It was to manipulate the intelligence to fit that political narrative. So yes, they also did not want things to come out, but they wanted to shape it in a way that would support the president's objectives.
Ken Cuccinelli, who was a top official in the Trump administration, is someone who, tell us about this interaction that you had with him. Was this in person? What did he say?
Yes, so I met with Ken Cuccinelli and Chad Wolf on an almost daily basis to brief them on intelligence. And, at one point, I had articulated, at many points I articulated to him that I was concerned about what was happening. I thought it was unethical, and there was probably violations of law. And he would, constantly tell me to, keep my mouth shut and to do what he said, and I refused.
So you started complaining. This whistleblower complaint wasn't the only time.
Yes. So right after I arrived at DHS in 2018 from the FBI, it was intense. And those three issues I just talked about were immediately told to me that these are things that aren't going to either come out or we're going to change the narrative, intelligence. And I issued my first IG complaint in 2018, really 4 or 5 months after I arrived, and then again in March of 2019. So, by the time it came to 2020, I had a target on my back. I've been told multiple times they knew that I was the one behind these IG complaints. It was only a matter of time before I'd get fired.
So who said that to you? Who basically said, hey, we need to change the narrative? And did they actually use words like change the narrative?
So I was told by virtually all the senior departmental officials,
𝙒𝙗𝙒𝙗𝙗,
𝘿𝙃𝙎 and many others. And the words that they used were, I'm ordering you to change the outcome of these products, these intelligence products we would do. And I told them many times that I would not do that, and if they kept the pressure up, I would go to Congress or use the whistleblower path to make sure that it was addressed.
Ken Cuccinelli demanded that you modify the Homeland Threat Assessment, specifically on the topic of white supremacy?
That's right. So we completed the Homeland Threat Assessment in March of 2020, and it doesn't go out for months. And the reason for that is Ken Cuccinelli and 𝘿𝙃 and others consistently wanted several areas changed. One was on the white supremacy part, and the other was on the Russian disinformation.
Did they explain why they thought that made President Trump look bad?
So Cuccinelli told me that because of what the president's statement in Charlottesville, and then more as the spring and summer of 2020 went along, as it related to the murder of George Floyd and other things, in that time era, that it would make the president look bad. I mean, that's were his exact words.
So we know this was a big threat. White supremacy, anti-government extremism. We saw some of the fruits of that on January 6th during the insurrection. Do you think this denialism affected preparedness for January 6th?
Absolutely. And the organization that I led, I was removed in July. Everything that we were doing to find violence on social media, regardless of where it was coming from, was shut down by my predecessor. My predecessor, strikingly now, is on the January 6th committee, and he is the one that shut all of those things down, all those safeguards we had in place. And I'm pretty confident my team would have found it. I'm positive they would have found it. But strikingly, Joseph Maher now sits on the committee investigating himself, which I am baffled why, one, he would take that job, and two, why they chose to put him on the committee.
I do want to ask you about the response from some of these officials that you have, of course, pointed a finger at. For instance, 𝘿𝙃, the then DHS chief, has disparaged your credibility and said that you were essentially part of violating legal requirements when it came to reporting on journalists during the activities in Portland, the Portland violence that we saw. I want to listen to something that 𝘿𝙃 said.
Regarding the intelligence and analysis, whistleblower complaint from Mr. Murphy is patently false. It's a fabrication, completely. I reject any claim that I attempted to influence or retaliate against any individual at DHS, but specifically Mr. Murphy.
What's your reaction to that?
So my reaction is that there was a pattern at DHS covering many areas of which I've just articulated, and Chad was part of there. At no point did me or any member of my team ever collect information on reporters or violate any law or anything along those lines.
So he's lying?
I think that he has a credibility problem, that when he removed me, he told me that he knew that there was no violations in place, but he was tired of me not being a team player, and that he was up for confirmation, and he was concerned about the optics that he would have to face from the media. And I'm not surprised the media reacted the way they did. Everything that was coming from the department at that time, I didn't even believe it. It was just like walking in a hall of mirrors on a slanted floor, and it was all twisted and turned upside down. But yeah, let me be unequivocally clear. At no point did me or anyone else collect on journalists for journalists' sake. We were collecting on content which was publicly available. And I would also add that I've been told by multiple people now, the Inspector General has completed the report on my organization's activity in Portland and completely cleared me. And I would like to see that report come out. I've never read it, so I can't, I don't know fully what it says, but I'm willing to see what it has to say. But that's what I've been told. So I would like to see the Inspector General release it. I have no idea why they haven't.
Brian, thank you so much for joining us in studio today to talk about this. It is great to finally hear from you personally about this.
Thank you.
Thank you. Brian Murphy.
There's something so